Don't listen to the fellow next door to you. Make your own way up this huge climax. And if you're playing anything like the fellow next door to you, you're playing a wrong note.
Hi everyone. It's hard to believe I'm here already at the last song on the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club album. And as I said last time, this comes after the end of the printed program, so to speak. It's going to be, I have so much I want to say about it. Just like I did with the previous song, I listened to it a couple times, actually last night before going to sleep, and to get it fresh in my mind and start thinking about, what are we going to explore? Of course, we'll go wherever the music takes us today, but it's been really nice for me to take a few moments to review it before sitting down in front of the camera, these last few songs, and maybe that's a habit I'll keep up more or less in the future. As usual, we'll sit down now and listen to my very first listen, which happened in the context of the whole album. And then we'll read what I have to read this morning, whatever Vlad has prepared for me. And then we'll dive in and go wherever it takes us. This is, of course, a day in the life. I'm going to save any more comments on that until we get a bit further in. The genre, officially, is psychedelic rock, progressive rock, baroque pop. Volumes have been written by scores of authors and reviewers on the songwriting history of A Day in the Life, but the best way to get the most accurate history is to let the composers themselves speak. John Lennon, 1967. I was writing the song with the Daily Mail propped up in front of me on the phone. Oops. What did I just say? Where did that come from? I was writing the song with the Daily Mail propped up in front of me on the piano. I had it open at their News in Brief, or Far and Near, whatever they call it. There was a paragraph about 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire being discovered. John Lennon, 1980. Just as it sounds. I was reading the paper one day, and I noticed two stories. One was the Guinness heir who killed himself in a car. That was the main headline story. He died in London in a car crash. On the next page was a story about 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire. In the streets, that is. They were going to fill them all. Paul's contribution was the beautiful little lick in the song, I'd Love to Turn You On. John Lennon, 1967. There was still one word missing in that verse when we came to record. I knew the line had to go, now they know how many holes it takes to something, the Albert Hall. For some reason, I couldn't think of the verb. What did the holes do to the Albert Hall? It was Terry Doran who said, fill the Albert Hall, and that was it. Perhaps I was looking for that word all the time, but couldn't put my tongue on it. Other people don't necessarily give you a word or a line. They just throw in the word you're looking for anyway. Sounds like he was a bit reluctant to give any credit away for this. George Martin. This was a song written by the two of them quite separately. John had the idea originally. For the first bit, he said to me, I don't know where to go from here. So Paul said, well, I've got this other song I've been working on. What do you think of it? This ended up being the middle bit, and so they joined the two bits together to make one song, Paul McCartney. It was a song that John brought over to me at Cavendish Avenue. It was his original idea. He'd been reading the Daily Mail and brought the newspaper with him to my house. We went upstairs to the music room and started to work on it. He had the first verse, he had the war, and a little bit of the second verse. I knew this was like a big song from the minute John brought it in, and we started working on it. We looked through the newspaper and both wrote the verse, how many holes in Blackburn, Lancashire? I like the way he said Lancashire, which is the way you pronounce it up north. This was the time of Tim Leary's turn on, tune in, drop out, and we wrote, I'd love to turn you on. John and I gave each other a knowing look. It's a drug song. You know that, don't you? Yes, but at the same time, our stuff is always very ambiguous, and turn you on can be sexual, so come on. The song inspired the creation of the deep note. The deep note is the sound trademark of THX. being a distinctive synthesized crescendo that glissandos from a relatively narrow frequency spread to a broader frequency spread. It was created by James A. Maurer, a former employee of Lucasfilm's computer division, in late 1982. The sound is used on trailers for THX-certified movie theaters, home video releases, video games, and in-car entertainment systems. The audio trademark for the THX Film Company. Thanks, Beatles. A Day in the Life remains one of the most influential and celebrated songs in popular music, appearing on many lists of the greatest songs of all time, and being commonly appraised as the Beatles' finest song. Well, if that isn't intimidating, now I have to sit down and explore it with you all, and actually, I know both Vlad behind the camera and so many of you have such high expectations. You've been saying, I can hardly wait until you get to this song. Pressure's on now. Let's dive in and have some fun. After all we've been through and that reprise of Sgt. Pepper's, the crowd goes wild. We even hear it at the tail end here, just the fade out of the crowd's applause. And this comes in. This song, to me, has a different sound, even at the opening in the introduction, than any of the other songs on this album. I mean, the depth and the warmth of the piano, the fullness of it, the chord progression, which just kind of smoothly glides us into the song. That voice. I guess that's Lennon's voice. But what is it about this voice? It's like, it's so cold, so detached, so it cuts to your core, and at the same time you can't call it sharp or edgy like normally you would think when you say, oh, it cuts into you. No, it's not a cutting voice. In fact, I've been trying to think, how would I sum up in words? How would I describe this voice? And it's so hard for me to put my finger on one or two words to sum it all up. In a way, it's like handling a piece of chalk. It's that it has that little bit of roughness to it, but it's just an incredible, it's kind of a spine-chilling sound, isn't it? When he starts to sing, it makes you shiver. It almost makes every hair stand up on end. It has this effect. And yet it's so gentle, so soft, and so unobtrusive, isn't it? And that, after this wonderful, warm piano chord kind of starting to crescendo and then drops out. It's as if, as the piano is doing these chords, bum, 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 and then it goes for the higher chords, bum, bum, and we start to think, oh, we're going to hear a big crescendo, bum, 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 some big, grand, dramatic entrance. But instead, it cuts short, dives down, drops off. It's almost like it's anticipating what we hear in the song. I read the news of somebody, their life was going on and then suddenly it's gone. All the drama of life that happens and sometimes ends life, whether it's something as ordinary as waking up, getting out of bed in a big rush, oh goodness, I'm late, gotta hurry, or if it's something like all the many potholes in a certain part of it, all this ordinary, mundane stuff, which we make such big, dramatic issues about it. And then the piano just says, cut it. Here's the voice. And it's that sort of interrupting of our way of doing things, interrupting of the flow, interrupting of the expected outcome, the interrupting of our train of thoughts even. The voice comes in, the piano stops, makes room for the voice, and the voice comes in and just takes over. And it's so funny to think that this little piano few chords banging away at the beginning, and I can say that because I'm a pianist, so I'm insulting myself when I say banging. But you know, it's the idea of bum 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 bum. It's just a few chords, you just bang them on the piano and that's it. But then they're gone. And it's the loss of them that is the most powerful part of this introduction in my mind. All right, and I was saying just a moment ago that there's a sound about this piece that feels to me so different than the rest of the album. One thing is the same, and that is the prominence of the bass. Even here, the bass is just carrying the day. It moves in such a perfectly suited manner for the song and keeps us going. And it's the other thing we notice when the voice starts to enter, kind of anticipates the voice just a bit. I guess the thing about the bass that catches me in this song is really how melodic it is. It's moving, as you see, I'm tracing the lines down, up. It moves so smoothly. It's not just bong, 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 bouncing around, or even playing like what we call the walking bass pattern, where it's walking around lively, but it's still kind of sketching out the chords. This feels much more melodic, and we could even, let's just play a little game here for a moment and take the bass notes and kind of shape them into a melody of sorts. I'm even going to take it up a couple octaves so we can think of it more as a melody. And of course, I'm modifying it a bit to make it a little more melodic feeling. That could be something that somebody would sing, a melody, right? Nice little F natural. Let's see, where did we end up? Down on a G there. That's far enough to get the idea, right? Now let's go back and listen to the same little bit with our ears towards the bass and just appreciate that beautiful melodic quality that it brings to the piece. Oh my goodness. So, well, okay, I gotta stop because I have to back up. Before I get off the topic of this melodic bass, I need to talk about the melody for a minute. As I said, I listened to this a couple times last night before going to sleep. And all night long, I had the melody, not of the bass, but of the song running through my mind. I read the news today, oh boy, it was such an earworm. And then later, woke up, got out of bed. Also that one, they just kept returning to me in my sleep. And when I woke up this morning, I started thinking, why are they so sticky? Why are they such earworms? Why do they really just kind of work their way in and not leave? Because they're not actually that tuneful. They're not. And one of the things I wanted to point out here is how more tuneful, more melodic the bass line is than the actual melody that's being sung. I mean, look. Okay, it's kind of just zigzagging. And the same thing again. It's fragments. And I started thinking, why is it? What makes this something that just really sticks? Why is it so sticky? I think it's a combination of factors, actually. One of which is how each phrase starts feeling like a sort of musical manifestation of a simple pattern of speech. I read the news today. Oh boy. I read the news today. Oh boy. I read the news today. Oh boy. I've talked before several times on this channel about how jazz has this very speech pattern foundation to its rhythms. This is not jazz, but there are some things that are incredibly common between this song and, let's say, a jazz number. And one of the things is how the way Lennon is singing this. I read the news today, oh boy. It feels like just a natural flow of speech. The next little bit is a little bit more tuneful. Da 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 dum ba dum. We don't really talk like that, do we? But each phrase starts with this sort of speech pattern, and it has a bit of lilt and rise and fall, just like when we speak. I read the news today. Oh boy. Oh boy. And then the continuation of that is not so much about what I did, but suddenly it's what the news was about, which makes a perfect point at which to change the melodic approach from speech pattern, me telling you I read the news today, oh boy, to a recitation. And I'm choosing the word recitation specifically because it's a melody. And when you recite something, it's something memorized, prepared. This is something a bit prepared, isn't it? About a lucky man who made the grade. It has this sort of warm feeling of da 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 dum ba dee da dum, a little bit romantic style, isn't it? And then we immediately go back to, and though the news was rather sad. Oh, back to that speech pattern, because it's again my commentary on the news. This is where it kind of shifts, and that news commentary doesn't follow through, but we've had enough of it to set us up. Well, I just had to laugh. And the way he sings with that break in laugh, just like when we laugh, ha ha ha. Although he's not actually laughing, but he gives us that little breath break. Those are some of the things that make it feel so natural, like it just existed forever. Like this song never had a beginning, a moment of creation. It's somehow timeless in that regard. And these little qualities of, okay, a little bit of speech pattern, a little bit of recited prepared melody, a little bit of speech pattern, go back to the prepared melody. And of course, when it says, well, I just had to laugh, I saw the photograph. Oh, that brings a different meaning. And we haven't even got there in the song yet, so I'm kind of reading ahead. But you get the idea of some of the qualities that make this so memorable, so much a part of our world, in spite of the fact that it's not actually a tuneful little melody with a classic shape and all of the things that, in our elementary compositional lessons, our teachers tell us, this is a skill. Well, of course it's a skill you need to learn, but that doesn't mean that it's the only way. And this is a great example of another really powerful and far more sophisticated, far more advanced. And that's why you don't learn it first. This is not the beginnings of melody writing. This is not the beginnings of songwriting. This is an incredibly sophisticated, highly developed piece of music. even melodically speaking. But back to my original point. The bass is the one that gives us the smooth melody gliding along, while the voice is the one that is then left free to do more variety and more, we could say, melodic texture in its singing.
Well, I just had to
Between pulse, 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 and bum, 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 a little more rapid, subdivided pulsing, which also gives a very subtle underlying change in the feel of the piece. Okay, now let's talk about Ringo's drums, because what I find incredible about this piece of music, I was thinking about this too this morning. It's all so good. Ringo is hardly present, and yet he's omnipresent. These drums, it's almost like he's just taking moments where there are typically drum fills, between, and he's not even beating anything where he wouldn't normally do a drum fill. But when it comes time for a drum fill, he doesn't do your classic drum fill. It's more these sort of ominous sounding rhythmic patterns inserted here, there, and then just a strike. And as I'm listening to this piece, and I'm immersing myself in it and trying to feel every corner of it and explore all of it, I start to recognize that one of the things that creates this incredible emotional complexity within the piece is the drums themselves. And that's not a role that I typically associate with drums. Whether it's in the classical world or the rock world, I don't think of drums as being the instrument that creates your emotional complexity. Okay, it gives us the beat, it gives us energy, it adds some commentary, it has a very crucial role to play, but it's like Ringo said here, you know what? I'm not going to play my typical role. I'm done with that. I'm going to do something that I don't normally do. I am going to enhance and add a layer of emotional complexity, a feeling of, this feeling of impending doom, this darkness, this almost feeling of deep fear of the future. At the same time, isn't it beautiful? And I'm saying this about drums. Okay, let's go back to where we hear actually, let's start from the beginning. We're not so far in yet. And the power of it is the fact that we don't hear the drums very often. He doesn't wear out our ears. He doesn't wear out our senses. He doesn't allow us to take the drums for granted, so that when he does insert something, it is so impactful. No drums. And he chose the moment to enter when he blew his mind out in a car. In a way, it's almost like it's echoes of the crash itself. Not in a violent way, but somehow off in the distance, reverberating through the universe. It's that feeling. And can I say that the drums take on an almost Beethovenian quality here. Now, I have to explain that. There's this funny joke that Vlad and I were laughing about a few days back, and it goes like this. Mozart died and went to heaven. And he met God, and God says, "Welcome. You are, I'm so glad to have you here. You are going to be the conductor of my orchestra." And Mozart says, "But what about Bach?" And God says, "I am Bach." And it's such a great line. But then we were laughing at this joke. And then I said, but hold on, that's not good enough, because where's Beethoven in this whole picture? If God says, I am Bach and Mozart is the conductor, where's Beethoven in this? And Vlad came up, he said, Beethoven is the universe. And so I'm playing off of that conversation, which we had just kind of fooling around a few days ago, and saying that these drums take on a Beethovenian character, which perfectly suits Beethoven's music, doesn't it? And that's how I feel about it. That's how they impact me in this piece of music.
Well, you really took Lee's advice seriously.
Well, the truth is, I wasn't even trying to take his advice here, actually. I was just... they did catch my attention because it's so different. And it's not a stylistic drum beat of rock or disco or hip hop, whatever. It's not that. It's different. And it really grabbed my attention. Truth is, I wasn't even thinking about trying to pay attention to the drums here. But still, I am taking Lee's advice seriously. Yeah, that's another thing. I've commented many times about how the bass and the drums work so well together, they're partners and so on and so forth. As a pianist, pianists have this ongoing discussion of how do we handle the piano? Really, how do we treat it? Is it a percussion instrument? Is it a harmonic instrument? Is it a melodic instrument? How do we handle the piano? Because how you think of it and how you approach it has a huge impact on what you're going to get out of it, right? And in the classical world, there's always this sort of dichotomy. The piano strikes the keys and strikes the strings, and the sound dies away rapidly, very much like a percussion instrument, a tuned percussion instrument. And yet, so much of classical music treats it melodically, harmonically. But here, I feel like the piano is fitting more into the percussion role, commenting, collaborating with the drums. Notice that just a little bit of piano insertion there, as Ringo is doing that special moment.
Notice that the lights have changed.
Which, by the way, I have to say, is quite jazzy. Da-da-da-da. This does have a good bit of jazz feel to it, in spite of the fact that I can't call it jazz. And here comes that piano again. Bum, 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 bum. But what came before that? Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords. That right here is such a welcome change, because up until this point, we've been working with essentially these two little phrase fragments. This one that da 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 da, the speech pattern one, and then the prepared melodic one. And we're alternating back and forth. And, well, again, let me not get ahead of myself. Let's talk about the contribution of the harmonic scheme. Because this piece is mainly written, at least this portion of the piece is mainly written in the key of G major. G major is a pretty bright sounding key, isn't it? Bright and confident. But then it just doesn't strike us as being a bright, happy, confident piece of music. What's happening? And I noticed that each one of these phrases, each time he sings this speech pattern, dum dum bum 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 ba da dum. Let me find one where I haven't marked it all up. Let's go back to the beginning here and start here. Okay. Yeah, we're basically walking around. on notes that could be part of a G chord. But what happens really harmonically is by the end of the phrase, actually quite rapidly, he's moved into a minor. So he moves from G major to B minor, and then instead of to G to E minor. What he does with this phrase is, by the end, we've moved onto the relative minor. And so even though each one starts in G major, and we're really working in G major, still he settles so frequently on E minor. It leaves this feeling of kind of deflation and almost being depressed. Da 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 da. And it's enhanced by the fact that each phrase falls at the end. None of the phrases really have a peak. Da 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 da. I mean, we could call that a peak, but there's another one right here equal to it. There's no real standard climactic shape where you arch up to a climax and then come down. It's as I said, it's more speech pattern, which means the peak of the phrase, there's not even a single peak of the phrase. Instead, we have two fairly equal, neither of which serve as a real high point. But what it does is it gives us somewhere from which to fall. And boy, do we fall. Not only pitch-wise in the melody, falling all the way back down here as far as we can go within that fourth, but we also fall harmonically. We fall to the minor. And funny, just a few days ago, I was talking about how Leonard Cohen plays around with his whole idea of a minor fall, a major lift, whatever it was. And here I am using that terminology to express what's happening in the music here. We fall to the minor from here to here. Completely different. I read the news almost like today it was a good morning, a bright morning. But as soon as I picked up the newspaper, things became overcast, depressing, and it's reflected in my speech patterns, in my entire demeanor, attitude, as I'm sitting here telling you about this, right? Why do I emphasize that? Because up until this point, we've heard that pattern. I've read the news today, oh boy, about a lucky man who made the grade. Okay, this one didn't end downwards, but it ended minor, and it ended as a sort of unfinished thought, kind of trailing off, incomplete, about a lucky man who made the grade. And then here we go again. And though the news was rather sad, even we have sad landing on the fall of the chord and the melody. Well, I just had to laugh. Well, that one didn't rise. It stayed down. And look at this. It ended on the E minor. Again. I saw the photograph on E minor again. He blew his mind out in a car. Same phrase again. Same fall. He didn't notice that the lights had changed. Okay, this one is the lights had changed, kind of is an unfinished thought or inconclusive. A bit of a question there. Almost as if they're asking, he didn't notice that the lights had changed? Here we are back to this. A crowd of people stood and stared. What's going on? There we go. Same fall, same pattern. They'd seen his face before. Same little melodic shape, but still ending downwards rather than even moving up to a question. And then, Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords. Okay, all that I've been saying about the melody is to prepare us for this moment. Where on earth did this come from? It's almost as if there's a feeling of disbelief. Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords. There's a bit of excitement wanting to bubble up, but it just can't quite sound excited. And then House of Lords, that shoots way off into the stratosphere. Like, where did that come from? We've been so capped, so deflated, so non-energized. And even as he sings it, the way he sings it doesn't even particularly sound energetic, does it? Why? Well, partly because he's not giving us a real energized crescendo, and the way he's pulsing it is more like it's... Let me explain it this way. This is something that we musicians have to think about when we're shaping phrases and everything. Where is the center of the energy? Are we driving towards an energized point? Or are we simmering away from one? And even though this flies up, it's more like it was a ball that's thrown and is gradually losing its energy. Or we could say a string that has been plucked and it's continuing to vibrate, but at lower and lower energy levels. Nobody was really sure he was from... What are they doing? Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords. And we managed to launch up there, but it's almost like we feel like we kind of just trailed off in our thought. And we end up there because we didn't really have a goal of where to go. We just ended there. Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords. What to say, where to go? It's just trailing off, leaving something unfinished hanging in the air. And, well, if I clear this out a bit, you can see that we are dealing with another E minor section, believe it or not. E minor, even as we're doing, nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords. We do end major, but it's not that impactful as far as the underlying psychological state. It doesn't really change us to a happy state, does it? Not really. And so we have this sort of, this has triggered our thoughts, and we've got a little flurry of thoughts. Nobody was really sure if he's from the House of Lords, but then it just fizzles away into nothingness. And then we go right back into nobody was really sure if he's from the House of tonal coloring. Now, if you remember way back when I started this journey early on, I sat down with Carl up in Canada, and we had some discussions about drumming and what the drums contribute. And, you know, it was so early in my journey. I was trying to wrap my head around this idea of an instrument being so prominent. What is its value to the music? Because it's not really harmonic, it's not melodic, and it's such a force. And it made sense what he said. But here I find myself using a phrase that I don't know if I have ever used for drums before. Tonal coloring. Tonal coloring. I've talked about texture. I've talked about rhythmic energy. I've talked about collaboration with different parts of the ensemble, whether it's with the voice or with the piano or with the organ or with the guitar or with the bass. I've noticed a lot of things happening that the drums can do and do. But I don't know if I've ever made the comment until today that the drums are serving the role of creating a tonal color palette. They are coloring. Think of this visually. Think of this as a visual work of art. Think of shading and coloring the picture before you to create this sort of rainy, gray autumn day. What do we normally use to do that? We use harmonies. We use instruments with melodic, tuneful capacity. And here, again, I guess this is the most impressive bit of drumming I've ever heard come out of Ringo. And I have enjoyed a lot of his drums through this whole journey. But this just, to me, it's incredible because of the role he is playing in this ensemble. And I'm just in amazement, really. I'm thinking, the drummer is doing this for this piece of music. Here we are, we come again to this time, interestingly, we have the same trailing off without the energy. But I just had to look, having read the book. And again, it's as if our thoughts are trailing off and we can't really justify. We're just saying, I just had to look. Why? Everybody else was turning away. I couldn't help it because I'd read the book.
Turned away.
So, I want to say this came out of nowhere, but the fact is it didn't. Where did it come from? It's a sort of retrograde, not even retrograde, but separation and reordering of what we heard up here with, where did this come from? Oh, where is it? Oh, yes. Nobody was really sure if he's from the House of Lords. Da 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 da. Now, as I said, right here, we had this having read the book, or the House of Lords, from the House of Lords. Having read the book without the da 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 da. Why? Because they saved it. They saved it to happen here. Right afterwards. And I'd love to, it's interesting again the way we kind of come down off of this high note here, having read the book, and we trail off and we're just in this sort of peaceful, detached state. I'd love to turn. And it fades away. Again, it's non-energized, or I wouldn't say de-energized. It's after the string is struck. It's this decay. Now, this, I guess, in my first listen, is the moment when I thought, whoa, hold on. That sounds like Pink Floyd. That sounds like The Wall. That sounds like this has so much of the sonic feel that I find in Pink Floyd's The Wall. And
Well, chronologically, it's the other way around.
I know, but we're talking about the influence Beatles had on future bands, and I don't know where it was in the discussion, but along the way, there've been references saying that Pink Floyd couldn't have existed without the Beatles, and I thought, oh, man, they're so different, and then suddenly right here I'm realizing, oh, this is where the Beatles kind of set up the path for that new direction in music too. And even I wonder if Pink Floyd may have been a fan of this song. Surely they'd heard it many times, because as I'm listening to this, and I'm listening to what's the first song I listened to from Pink Floyd?
Hey You.
Hey You, Hey You. Yes, I'm thinking of Hey You, and the section in there in the middle where the worms ate into his brain. This here feels like this is where they pulled it from. The worms ate into his brain. Listen, listen, listen. You can hear even the buzz of flies starting to show up right here.
But I just had to look.
And I would have to count how many bars. Remember, I watched a little documentary about this album, and this was one of the things that was talked about, is how they created that incredible glissando. Well,
one more thing.
Okay.
One more thing before you, because remember, I don't know if you remember, but Pink Floyd recorded their debut album at the same time and in the same studio as the Beatles recorded Sgt. Pepper's album.
Pink Floyd recorded
their first
album
debut album at the same time, same studio, while the Beatles were there recording Sgt. Pepper's.
Okay.
Of course, the wall came later.
Later. But there must have been some cross-pollination happening there.
Of course, McCartney was a Pink Floyd fan as well.
Okay. So goes both ways.
There you go.
That explains everything. Right? Well, okay. This is just such a great piece of music, right? What was I saying about this glissando? I learned how they made this glissando, and they took the orchestra. Somebody created a rhythm track to count everybody in, counting the bars 1, 2, banging on the piano to give the, I don't remember which pitch, but it's like 1. Oops, hold on. Let's get the piano on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Counting in the bars, however long this needed to be going. And they told the musicians, they said, look, start at this low note, end at this high note, and along the way, play whatever note you want to. You can land on any note you please, as long as it's as long as it's ascending, and as long as you arrive at the right time at this top note. And they had
it was more than that. You will see.
Okay, fine, but the idea is that this is kind of an avant-garde compositional style where you're giving the musicians quite a bit of liberty within a very strict framework. And you see this in modern classical music too. It's something that kind of developed in the 20th century, pre-Beatles even. But I don't know if I've seen anyone before the Beatles use this. I think this was kind of the moment that it was imported into rock music. The idea that, okay, you say, start here, end here. Within this space, do whatever you please, sort of. You have to be following this pattern. And then we end up with this fabulous, chaotic, wild crescendo that is truly terrifying. I mean, it's like, it keeps coming and it keeps coming, and you expect it to end, you expect it to arrive, and it keeps coming and coming and coming and coming. And there's this sort of feeling of, a child's terror on Halloween night or something. And even the way it's notated here, you see, we're coming out of this da 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 da, which was such a great way to transition. And then, as I said, that sort of buzzing flies. I call it buzzing flies simply because the first time I heard it, it was about the worms ate into his brain, right? But back to Beatles here. We kind of morph from yada da 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 da, and then it starts to build and build and build, and this is the symbol for glissando, and it just goes through all of this, all the way up to here, and that's the point at which that's all that's written in the score for all of this grand, terrifying experience. And then, of course, that's the transition into McCartney's contribution.
Having read the book.
Heard this in my first listen. I didn't catch that it said, I'd love to turn you on. I had the lyrics in front of me, but I wasn't following word for word. Somehow I thought it said, I'd love to tell you why. And somehow that felt very fitting. And I still, as I hear it, I still hear, I'd love to tell you why. Almost like, I wish I could explain all of this in the world to you. Well, there's my non-Beatles contribution to the song. All right. Now I have to confess that I was also noticing what Ringo was doing with the drums there. Because unlike the bass, which is pulsing 1, 2, 3, 4, he's leaving a note out from time to time. A beat out. And it keeps it from sounding too counted, too timed. And every once in a while he varies it a little bit. The pattern is... and I don't see that reflected in the score here, because they're showing a constant drum strike. But listen this time to the drums. Forget about the glissando. Listen what's happening to the drums. Isn't that great? And suddenly the piano is there. Bum, 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 bum. Well, should I play this on the harp or the piano? I guess I'll go to the piano because it's piano. And that's somehow coming in as continuing this same pulse that was being carried in the bass. Bum, 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 bum. Now the piano's carrying it. And it makes this transition feel so seamless, and we don't even realize there's something different coming. We might easily go back to da 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 dum ba dum. Da dum. And if the John Lennon part of the piece was not particularly melodically elaborate, this is even less so. Listen to this. We start G sharp and E. Woke up, got out of bed, dragged a comb across my head. And I'm kind of simplifying and kind of just bashing it out, because the idea is mostly what he's doing is this. Woke up, got out of bed, dragged a comb. Okay, I gotta go somewhere across my head. That works, fall down there. Okay, go there a bit, but then it's almost like he woke up with two favorite notes in his head, and that was it. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna take these two notes and make a little kind of pattern. Woke up, got out of bed, dragged a comb across my head. Again, this is conversational. Woke up, got out of bed, dragged a comb across my head, found my way downstairs and drank a cup. And looking up, I noticed I was late. Found my cab and found my coat and grabbed my hat. And let's see, I guess I have but I'm trying to follow anyway, you get the idea, and you can simply speak it, and he's mostly just speaking it. Listen. The bass goes, takes a moment there, and says, dragged a comb across my head, and says, oh, by the way, I'm going to exploit that little bit of a melodic curve, and we're going to go up. And I'll do a little echo of that shape there as well. Notice. All of this is just speaking. Speaking to a rhythm track with some piano chatter tossed in, a bass to keep the pulse going, because after all, we are in a rush, right? I woke up, I was late, and I just kind of clattered through the house, grabbed this, grabbed that, I made my cab, and now here I am. Finally got there, and had a smoke. I guess he had a chance to sit down. And, well, here's where we get to the point where, again, you could turn it into a drug song if you want. But if we're thinking about what else could it be besides a drug song? Because it really, truly is. It doesn't have to be a drug song. And even in their account, it just accidentally got to sound like a drug song because they weren't really thinking about that when they were creating it. Somebody spoke and I went into a dream. I'm way upstairs. Ah, look at all the lonely people. I'm sorry, my mind has to go there. I mean, in a way, what we heard here, I mean, this is the most melodic part of the entire song. Right here, these ahs. And I'm sorry, I cannot get away from the link to I look at all the lonely people. Right? I cannot get away from that. But suppose we try to get beyond that. Notice the crescendo. As this goes on, and the ahs go on, and the music builds, there's this crescendo building, and it's the brass underneath, which comes more and more strongly, and it ends up having the same impact as that insane crescendo we just experienced a little before the story came in. Right? Can I even call it a tune? Where? Back to, I read the news today, oh boy. I mean, this piece, I was talking in the Reprise, just the last song, I was talking about the form, the shape of the entire concert. In a way, this piece is a miniature of that, isn't it? Because it has the same overall ABA form. Well, of course, we don't have the whole development of the essay in the middle. It's just the B section, right? It's a shorter, more compact version, but still, it's the overall formal shape of it reflected in this final piece. And that's something we're going to get to talk about a bit when I get to the end and start talking, how does this fit in the whole scheme of the concert, the album? What's it all about, right? Okay, a bit to talk about. First, as I was saying, this last verse, we've heard it all before. And I was saying, yeah, it's more instrumentally active. We hear more drums, more instrumental contributions, but basically we recognize that we've heard it. Now, the glissando comes. We've heard all of that. We've been on this terrifying ride once before. We're not quite so frightened, but still we have expectations. We expect the ending now. We know where it's taking us, and it takes forever to get there, and we just keep going and going and going because we haven't quite learned how long it takes to get there. So and finally it comes. And we expected it to go to this cheery little, woke up, got out of bed, but instead it's this ominous boom that comes crashing in. Again, kind of like the car crash. As I said, it seems to just grow out of the ground, almost as if, a plane has crashed, completely disintegrated, and the reverberations are just emanating from the ground. Something like that. It's this feeling of there's some deep qualities of, this impending doom, this ominous premonitions of something, something, something. And it's such a sense of finality, which is just like the opening when I just had to laugh. He blew his mind out in a car. He didn't notice the lights had changed. Crowd of people stared. They'd seen his face before. It's the recitation of the news. And yet it's the shock of, man, a life ended so suddenly and there's no reversing it. We get to the end of the song. It ends so suddenly and there's no reversing it. And the music itself, even though we've long left that commentary about the news way back at the beginning, it comes back here musically, the sense of finality and irreversibility. And so for a piece of music that is kind of patched together, pieced together, two separate composers, two separate songs, some invented ways of linking, they managed to do an incredible job and turn it into a really powerful listening experience. Well, I have to refer once more back to Good Morning, because I feel like there are some strong links between this song and that song, and that's important. But if we thought that Good Morning sounded jaded and just done with all the insanity around us, then I would say this song strikes me as being kind of fatalistic. Like, that's the state of the world. That's how it's going to end. What to do? I'm here. Throw up my hands. As the phrase, da-dum-bum. Wait for the end. Bong. It has that built into it. Well, now comes the great big question of how does this fit into the overall album? What role does it serve here? I kind of hinted in the last song by saying that the printed program is over, finished, with the Sgt. Pepper's Reprise. So what is this then? I've been talking about how it comes across different than anything else in the album. It feels like a much more substantial work, although we've listened to some pretty substantial compositions along the way. This one has a weightiness, a solidity to it, a heft, that even something like, let's say, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds doesn't give us. This one has weight. Which means it's really kind of weird to just say, well, it's an encore. Because typically, when the paper program is over, the printed program is over, the crowd cheers, everybody applauds, everybody calls for an encore, the performers come back on stage, and they give an encore. But the idea is that an encore shouldn't compete with the rest of the program. It shouldn't. It's something, it's an extra little thing that you toss out to a little gift, a little bit of extra fun and enjoyment, because everybody obviously wants more, but it's late. They need to go home. You're done. You're tired. You've done your share, and it's just a special little, but it's usually small or lightweight. It's not a whole new program, and it doesn't compete. You don't want it to compete or overshadow the programmatic experience they've just had. You don't want it to kind of dilute what they have enjoyed so much, and so you typically keep them light. This is not at all light. As I said, kind of the darkest piece in the program itself, I would put my finger on as being Good Morning. This is far darker. It's, as I said, it's fatalistic. And you're going to pull this out of your back pocket for an encore? I don't think so. I don't think so. So what is this? How does this work? And then we have to start thinking a little bit more broadly, a little bit more experimentally, because weren't the Beatles experimental? Let's think literary for a moment. If we had just read a book with chapters and we had just come to the end of the book, because I talked about in the previous one about the idea of an essay and so forth. We come to the end of a book. What comes next? Well, it could be an epilogue. It could be an appendix. It could be any number of things. But I can't quite classify this as any of those either. I feel like this song really could serve as the substance out of which an entirely new concert could be built. It has enough in it. You could pull it apart, take bits and pieces, inspirations, and build an entire program around this as the centerpiece. So it can't just be something at the end of a book. And yet it's so woven into the fabric, so linked. I'm talking, it's further commentary beyond Good Morning, Good Morning. It is sending us back to something like Within You, Without You, the way it stops us in our tracks. The Beatles, yet again, they're stopping us in our tracks by breaking with convention. And they're not breaking with convention for its own sake, but they're really making us stop and think. Just like Lennon did with Good Morning, just like Harrison did with Within You, Without You, just like we have been arrested so many times throughout this entire experience. What is this? Well, I'm not saying that I have the final word, but I'm thinking of it in two ways that make sense to me. One is, the end of the printed program is not the end of the planned program. The end of the printed program, we could say, instead of being the end of the printed program, it is the end of the Sgt. Pepper's charade. Now they've taken off their costumes. They have taken off their alter egos. And they come back out on stage and say, look, that was a lot of fun. We all enjoyed it. But we have been building you up all the way up to this point, and this is us. And this is really the message of the entire program. And this is really the grand climax. And this is, in a way, it's the unveiling of the entire album. It's the album without the charade, without the dress up, without the impersonating fake identity, without taking on an alter ego, without the play, without the playfulness. This is the entire album. This is the message of the Beatles at this point, in this whole album. You could find practically every one of the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band ideas, thoughts, experiences, sentiments that were expressed. You could find a way to link this back to any one of those songs. If I go back to the literary idea again, I would say that this is the surprise ending. This is a book that had you expecting something and built an image in your mind of how things are supposed to go. And at the end, the author, in the last chapter, managed to pull the veil off your eyes, and you realize, hold on, I had the wrong idea all along. oh wow, and it just hits you like a load of bricks. It hits you. I had no clue. That's how I take this piece. It is too weighty, it is too substantial to be an encore. And one more little thing that makes me insist on saying that it is the substance, and it has to be built into this entire album. It cannot be, look, could it be a single? It's substantial enough to be a single. But I'm not sure that we would appreciate it as a single, because it took the entire album to build us up to this point. Again, that's why I'm saying it's like a book. We've read through all the chapters. We've built up. But this final chapter, we can't fully appreciate and experience without all of that stuff that came before. And the fun little link, there's still a piece of paper involved. It's still about a story in the newspaper. And so that is my take on it at this point in time. I'm sure that I will be listening to this many times in the future. I'm sure that my ideas about it will shift and develop, as they always do with practically any piece of music. That's just the way it is with music, with art. And speaking more broadly, with this entire album, because I can agree, having been through this whole experience, I can agree with what the whole world says, that this album is truly a work of art. And there is a timelessness to it. It is not just inventive. It is not just heralding a new era. It is not just influencing all who come after, but it is also timeless. And well, that could be a whole nother discussion that we dive into, but I think I have spent a long time on this, and there's a lot to talk about. I'm really looking forward to your comments and contributions to the discussion. Please write them below. I'll be following along. And, well, that brings us to the end of this wonderful Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band experience. I have even learned to rattle off the title in full without getting lost somewhere in the middle. And I'm ready to move on. So let's see what comes next. I'm sure it's going to be great. I'm eager to see where Beatles went from here. And I'll see you soon.